Hello, everyone, and welcome to At Barrons. I'm Andy Serwer, and welcome to our guest, Kevin Samuelson, CEO of Infor. Kevin, great to see you.
Wonderful to be here, Andy. Thanks for having me.
So Infor produces and distributes, I don't know if that's the right word for ERP software, make the software, sell the software. It's enterprise resource software. And other companies do this as well. But can you please really explain what enterprise software does, resource software does?
Yeah, so what we do is pretty simple. We run kind of the operations for businesses. So everything from the supply chain to actually manufacturing goods and then to distributing them to customers. And what makes Infor quite different is most software companies serve every industry. So they would sell the same software to a bank or a retailer or a manufacturer. We are laser focused on just 8 industries, most of which are in manufacturing and distribution. But we also have a large presence in U.S. hospitals and public sector. So we're focused on just a very few number of industries.
Right, and you compete against some of those big public companies that are well known, like Oracle and SAP. Would those be your 2 biggest competitors?
Yep, absolutely.
And those guys are what you're talking about, where they serve all different industries.
That's exactly right.
But is it hard to compete with them then in the specific industries that you're in, because they're in those businesses too then, and they have this full service suite of software for everybody?
Well, what I would say is they certainly have larger reputations. They've been around for longer, they're larger. But when it comes to the industries that we actually operate in, both our software is purpose-built for those industries, so the capabilities that are needed, as you can imagine, in a hospital are wildly different than in a bank. And so because our software is built for those environments, the capability is far broader, and then we complement that with people that are also from those industries. So bringing that differentiated view on software, that differentiated expertise around our people, has allowed us to show up pretty differently, and we compete very well in the industries that we focus on.
How did you pick those industries, Kevin, and do you look to expand the company and the business into new industries?
Well, we thought about where are the areas where there's a lot of operational complexity, where having depth of industry capability can really make a difference. And so you can imagine, given the supply chains, given all the complexities around manufacturing, that's an area where there's a huge amount of value that can be created by going deeply in those industries. And then hospitals as well, lots of very unique capabilities needed, functions needed. And so here again, it was an area we felt we could really differentiate. In terms of expanding, certainly we look for areas that are, though, adjacent to where we play now. So I don't see us going into financial services, for example, that's wildly different. But could there be other subsectors in manufacturing or distribution or healthcare? Absolutely. Those would be interesting for us.
I mean, healthcare is famously kind of a mess, I guess is one way to describe it, at least from the consumer perspective. Would your software go any ways to sort of solving those problems and making the whole experience better?
Yep. So what we do in hospitals is there's a clinical system, that's not what we do, and that's what patients typically interact with. We do all of what I'll call the back office system. So all the financials, we manage all the people within the hospital, we manage all the supply chain, so making sure the right supplies are at the right place at the right time. So certainly we play a role in that, and a lot of what we do is things that, for example, schedule the right doctor and the right nurse with their capabilities in the right place, or again, make sure that the right materials or solutions or elements that are needed for a surgery are in the right place at the right time. So that certainly helps, but we work with clinical systems to try to optimize that experience.
I've read that you're going to do about $3.4 billion in revenue this year. How does that compare with the size of other software companies, public names that we're more familiar with?
So we're certainly amongst the largest, probably the top 3 or 4 in ERP. But Oracle's much larger. They're probably the largest. Now, they're in a number of different markets, certainly application software, but as you know, they do databases. They're trying to build a hyperscaler business, so far broader in what they do. And SAP is also quite a bit larger, and they're probably the closest that we are to being a pure application company.
You're owned by Koch Industries. They bought the company for a reported $13 billion in 2020. Why is that an advantage, or is it often a disadvantage?
It's been a huge advantage and a bit unexpected, because obviously when we were initially approached by Koch Industries in 2016 and they wanted to take a share of Infor and come on the board and learn more about enterprise software, and they originally started actually as a customer. Process manufacturing is something we're focused on. They own Georgia Pacific. And so having worked with them, we certainly knew Georgia Pacific well, but having a large industrial investor was quite unique. But it's proven to be a massive competitive advantage. I think what makes Koch very unique are a few things. Number one, the focus on the long term. And our customers tend to be with us for 10 years or 20 years. This is quite different. And in a world where, as a public company, every 90 days, you've got to post results, your employees are largely paid in options, it's almost in contrast to what's important to customers. So the ability to really think and act long term, make bigger investments, really think about a better customer experience, we're uniquely able to do that because of Koch. And I think the other thing is a focus on what they call mutual benefit, which is whether it's a relationship with your wife or a business partner, for something to be sustainable for a long time, both sides have to benefit. And we've really taken that to heart, and it's a different way of working with customers and employees, and it's allowed us to grow more quickly, get much closer to customers and give them better outcomes. So it's been a huge advantage for us.
But Kevin, you yourself just mentioned that Koch Industries is known for being an industrial holding company, I guess is one way to describe it, or holding industrial companies. So do they really even have any expertise in software?
Yeah, people don't know a lot about them because they are private, but they're huge investors in technology, well over $30 billion invested in tech, and everything from venture capital to private equity-like investments, and obviously to Infor. So given the breadth of focus that they have across all those different industries, the criticality of technology has always been front and center, and they're very forward-leaning. So they certainly know their stuff around tech.
How closely do you work with family members or the people who run Koch Industries?
Very closely. They're still very engaged in the business. Charles Koch's engaged every single day, and so work with them at board meetings and whenever we're making relatively big decisions.
What is it like recruiting and retaining people who want to work in technology and they're so used to the payoff of IPOs or publicly traded equity? How does that work for talent?
Well, fortunately, I mean, everyone's very well paid in what we do, and we're no different in that regard. I think for employees that want more certainty, less volatility, and still be well paid, but also be able to build a career for the long term, we're in a very unique position in that regard. So there certainly is, for a lot of folks, a lot of appeal to being in a private company.
Right. And would Koch ever sell the company or talk about doing an IPO? Have they ever done that with other holdings, done IPOs or spin them off?
With a few exceptions, they've done a few spin-offs that I'm aware of, but by and large, their approach is to buy something and hold it almost indefinitely. And certainly we operate as if it will be held by Koch indefinitely, which allows us to, again, make those longer-term decisions. So that's at least how we think about it, and never say never, but I don't think that's likely.
Right. How big is the TAM, the total addressable market, for enterprise software?
Well, the areas that we focus, so if we look at the industries that we focus on, the customer sizes that we focus on, it's north of $100 billion. So it's an incredibly large market. What's quite unique, though, is most customers are on legacy technology. So we're still at the very front end of this cloud upgrade cycle. So it's a big, big opportunity, and I think leadership in this space will probably evolve and change over the course of the next 10 or 20 years as more and more companies embrace cloud computing, embrace what's possible in areas like Gen AI, which require cloud computing. So it's a pretty exciting market in addition to being large.
And you've been CEO since when?
Since the end of 2019.
Okay. And you've done other things at the company. You were the CFO, you were doing the M&A part of the company, you bought a lot of businesses. How has that split been in terms of organic growth versus acquisitions?
Yeah, so I've actually been with Infor since the company started in 2002. I did leave for a couple of years and come back. And you're exactly right. When I started, I was focused on M&A, and we were enormously acquisitive. Almost all of our growth was inorganic from about 2002 until about 2012 or so. Made over 65 acquisitions, grew to over $2 billion at a very rapid rate. But subsequent to that, we focused heavily and spent about $4.5 billion rewriting our products in multi-tenant SaaS cloud technologies and then rolling those out. And so our growth subsequent to that has been largely organic. We still make acquisitions, but had a lot of demand just given that industry differentiation. Right.
And as CEO now, Kevin, what is your focus? What is your strategy going forward? What are you looking to do with the company and the business?
Yeah. So our vision is to make people's lives better. And that maybe sounds like a big, audacious thing for a software company to do. But if you think about the work that we do, which is, for example, allow nurses to more efficiently treat patients or allow companies to better manufacture and distribute food, the impact we can have is pretty large. And so if we keep that notion at the center of everything that we do and truly focus on customer outcomes, how do we drive better profit, more revenue growth, better outcomes for their customers, that's what we think can really differentiate. And it takes that combination of deep industry expertise, the backing of Koch, the ability to think very long term, and then just challenging the status quo on the typical ways of selling and implementing software. As interesting as our software is, most customers are still very scared to have to go implement a brand new system. So we're constantly thinking of ways to be innovative, to make it much easier to implement and to adopt and then drive value from.
And tell us a little bit about yourself. You live in Manhattan now, where the company's based, but you grew up in the San Juan Islands, Washington State. Did you always want to be a software CEO when you were a little kid?
I am definitely the accidental software CEO. Yeah, I grew up in a little island. My dad was the town barber, and I ended up going to college, and I never took a finance class or a computer science class. I wanted to be a teacher and did that for a couple of years, and then managed to stumble my way into an investment bank during the internet days when they would hire anybody. But that gave me great exposure to tech and finance, and that led to joining Infor at the very beginning, and became the CFO after I did M&A, which was an awesome experience to really understand the drivers of our business, what matters to customers, and then became a CEO. So it's been quite an unexpected journey and pretty amazing, and I'm surprised as anybody that I've ended up where I am.
And your predecessor in the CEO role was Charles Phillips, a senior executive at Oracle before that. Let me ask you just sort of a theoretical question, Kevin, and that is about technology and young people and careers. Technology is such a big part of our economy today, and so many people go into it. Do you think it holds too much sway in terms of where young people want to work and what sort of motivates them? Rather than looking to make things, people are just doing software, which helps other people make things. I wonder if there's going to be anyone who makes things anymore in this country.
Well, I have 2 teenage daughters, so this is something I think about a lot for what their futures might hold. And albeit I'm biased, I do think there's probably more potential for a young person to learn and grow and do so many different things if they have an anchoring in technology. Ultimately, if they decide to go and work in a manufacturing plant or something else, that background in technology will help. But fundamentally, if we think about the world we're in today, and whether it's automation or robotics or Gen AI, it's hard to imagine that being close to that and involved in that isn't going to be where most of the value is created, where there'll be more opportunities over time, and where you can be exposed to really interesting things that challenge young people. So, like I said, I'm biased, but I think it's a wonderful place for young people to build a career.
One thing I didn't ask you about Infor is how global the business is. Do you serve other countries and other markets? And maybe you can talk about how many people work there, some metrics along those lines.
Yeah, so we have 20,000 employees, roughly. We're incredibly global. Only about half of our revenue's in the US. The rest is outside. We have offices in 40 countries and customers in 100 plus countries. So we're extremely global.
And what does customer behavior right now tell you about where the economy's headed? How are they buying, and how optimistic or pessimistic or cautious are they?
So we do really well when there's a lot of change. And so if you take into account everything from inflation to geopolitics and the effect that can have on supply chains, to the actual effect of things like AI and Gen AI, I think most companies right now are leaning in heavily to evolving their technology. So we're seeing incredibly strong demand all over the world, in Asia, in Europe, in North America. I wouldn't say we're indifferent to economic conditions, but I definitely think we're advantaged, just given the rate of change and the requirements to adopt the latest technologies to take advantage of all that's possible.
What about working with the government, let's say state and local and the federal government, both in terms of partnering with them and or they as customers, and in terms of regulation of your business and industry?
Yep.
That's a lot.
No problem. We don't do a lot in federal, to be fair, but we do a lot in both states as well as cities. So Idaho, for example, was the first state to go live on a cloud computing platform that we work with them on. And I think what I would say in cities and states is they are very cautious of what's happening with regulation, and especially around IT systems. Security's of unbelievable importance given all that we've seen. But again, if you could think about where we're headed with some of the newer technologies, just what exactly is occurring with data, how it's being stored, how it's being used, who it's being shared with, those are areas that, at least at this moment, governments are leaning heavily into. So there are things like FedRAMP, which is a set of actually federal requirements for managing data and applications, and even cities and states are adopting these more aggressive regulations to make sure that they're ahead of the game.
And finally, I want to ask you about AI, and you mentioned maybe some other technology trends. Does AI figure into the software that you make and sell? And if so, how?
Hugely important to us. And again, I know I've mentioned our industry focus many times, but I was in Asia last week, for example, and gosh, I probably met with 100 plus customers. And in every room, I asked the question, who in the room is using Gen AI in a way that's generating value? And I had 0 people raise their hands. And in detailed discussions, there's enormous curiosity, there's enormous interest, but what are the ways to actually apply it that can help a business? And our ability to show up with actual solutions that help solve specific industry problems is very differentiated. So let me give you an example. Combalift is one of the larger manufacturers of forklifts. And as you can imagine, a forklift, everyone's built uniquely for the end customer. So they have about...
And where are they based?
They're based in Ireland, actually.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there's about 60,000 different forklifts that they've got out in the world today that span 10, 15 years. So a huge amount of complexity. And one of the issues they had was customers would call in because they needed a part replaced, and they'd have to find the VIN number. They'd have to then go into one system and try to find which configuration the forklift was built with. Then they'd go to a different system to figure out what the right replacements were. Then they'd have to go to the inventory system to see if they had that in stock. And these are typically relatively low-paid support employees. Lots of mistakes, lots of issues. It's a good example of where we could take Gen AI and other industry capabilities, and they saw a 30% improvement in the efficacy of those fixes on the first try. They cut the cost of supporting customers by 40% and saw a 20+% increase in the ability to cross-sell and upsell. So it's being able to take those specific issues that customers face and not just give them a tool, but actually show up with a solution that drives revenue, profits, retention, those sorts of outcomes. It's quite different.
And just a quick follow-up. So then you're suggesting that AI is driving your business at this point and actually enhancing revenue growth?
No question. It's absolutely at the top of the list. And because of our focus, it's allowed us to make sure that data is stored with industry specific as part of data models themselves, that everything we do is built around taking our stack of capabilities and adding automation, adding AI, because that's where we're headed, and that's where customers see value, and that's what makes employees' jobs far more fulfilling, so it's a big focus for us.
Kevin Samuelson, CEO of Infor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is at Barrons. I'm Andy Serwer. We'll catch you next time.